Our top story. Elon Musk's social media platform X is taking the Indian government to court, accusing it of imposing an unlawful blocking regime through backdoor censorship. The lawsuit filed in the Karnataka High Court challenges how the centre is using Section 79(3)(b) of the IT Act to force content takedowns without following the proper legal process, which have been outlined in Section 69A of the IT Act. Now, X is arguing that this method bypasses crucial safeguards, one that require transparency reasons for blocking and an opportunity to challenge these orders of takedown. Now, the platform says that these actions violate what the Supreme Court itself had said in a 25 order in which it had struck down a contentious Section 66 of the IT Act and say that they pose a threat to free speech. More importantly, X is claiming that arbitrary blocking orders could hurt its business and damage the trust users have in it. The government, however, has hit back, saying that social media platforms must follow Indian law and that Section 79(3)(b) gives it the power to direct intermediaries to remove unlawful content. Sources indicate that the centre believes the due process is being followed and that X is simply resisting compliance. Now, just as the legal battle escalates, another controversy of a Musk-led platform is also brewing, this time involving AI. Grok, many feel the rather flamboyant chatbot, which is integrated into X, has shocked users with its rather unfiltered and abusive Hindi responses. It has even come up with very politically incorrect responses to some leaders as well. So, this happened when some users provoked Grok with casual banter and the chatbot fired back with Hindi slang, even expletives. The backlash has now reached the Indian government, and which is why the IT ministry also had to step down to investigate how this happened and as to whether Grok's AI model is failing at content moderation. So on one hand, X is fighting censorship. On the other hand, its AI is under fire for lacking control. Is this then a battle between big tech and big brother? Or is this a case of big tech failing to self-regulate? That debate starts now, and I have probably one of the best panels in terms of expertise joining me at this point. We have Pavan Duggal, who is India's foremost cybersecurity expert, Khushbu Jain, who is a noted advocate of the Supreme Court, Rahul Bajaj is CEO of Digital Darwin, someone who has extensively understood and spoken on this channel, on this platform when it comes to AI and AI-related issues. And of course, we have Manish Barriarr, who is a political analyst who understands how the BJP government functions. Let me start with you, Pavan Duggal, as the cybersecurity expert on this panel. You have raised concerns several times as to how India does not have a foolproof mechanism when it comes to content regulation and when it comes to keeping censorship away. It seems that even X is now realizing that. Can you take us through in a language where an audience will understand what is so problematic about Section 79(3)(b) of the IT Act?
Well, Section 79 of the IT Act is a solitary section under Chapter Roman 12 under the IT Act, which deals with the entire issue of granting statutory exemption from legal liability to intermediaries. First and foremost, the law says any person who on behalf of another person receives, stores or transmits any particular electronic record becomes an intermediary under Section 21W of the IT Act. And once you're an intermediary, the law says, I'm going to grant you statutory exemption from legal exposure, legal liability, provided you fulfill 4 conditions. These 4 conditions are given under Section 79. Number 1, you comply with the IT Act and rules and regulations made thereunder. Number 2, you exercise due diligence while you discharge your obligations under the law. Number 3, you do not conspire or abet in the commission of any cognizable offense. Number 4, as and when you're called upon to do so, to disable or remove any content, as directed by the government, you shall expeditiously remove or disable access to such content without vitiating the original electronic evidence in any manner whatsoever. If you fulfill these 4 conditions, then the law says, I'm giving you a Suraksha Kavach, a security exemption, which means you can be sued anywhere in the country, but you can't be sent to jail. You cannot be forced to pay 1 rupee damages by way of compensation. So that's the hallowed space of statutory exemption from legal liability that's given under Section 79 of the IT Act. But you have to realize that this is dependent on the intermediary fulfilling these 4 conditions. One of these conditions are that as and when the central government will want you to remove or disable access to any information, you will do that expeditiously without vitiating or impacting the original electronic evidence. So the power to direct removal or disabling of access is inherent in Section 79 of the IT Act. This is completely different from the power of blocking, which is given under Section 69A of the IT Act. Blocking is, here is some content, if the government finds it's necessary in the interest of sovereignty, security, integrity of India, friendly relations with other nations,
Correct.
public order, decency, morality, or to prevent the commission of any cognizable offense, the government says to all service providers, block them. That's only blocking. Here, under 79, it's not the blocking power. It's the power to direct disabling or removing of access. So this is a different power. Now, Section 81 of the IT Act says this is a special law, and the provisions of this law shall prevail over anything inconsistent therewith contained in any other law for the time being in force. So it's a very exciting and new proposition of law that will have to be tested before the courts as we go forward.
Yes, indeed. This is something that that's been filed in the Karnataka High Court that the hearing will continue. But Manish Barriarr, when Elon Musk took over X, there was a lot of celebration and maybe a sigh of relief also, perhaps, in the ecosystem which supports the government on ideological reasons, because the feeling was that the previous regime of Twitter was left-leaning and therefore there were cases of censorship and there were cases of narrative being stifled. When Elon Musk, someone who is probably one of the biggest champions of right-wing speech and a right-wing and conservative ideology, is forced to move the court against the government just days after meeting the Prime Minister and giving a visible show of bonhomie, that means that evidently the problem of content control and censorship on X has gone out of control.
Good evening to you and to my co-panelists and all the viewers. So I think we will have to separate two aspects, what Elon Musk says and what he does. Because, you would know that his friend, US President Trump, he also speaks lots of things, does something else. I think we have to look at our own country and our own national interest the way every country is looking at their own, its own national interest. Now, we have to look at the entire thing from this context. Just because X has taken the government to court, it doesn't mean that the government is incorrect. In fact, I would rather believe that the way Grok has behaved, it is highly irresponsible on the part of, and the government of India, including Prime Minister Modi, has talked about ethical AI. Now, the same can be, talked about any social media, any networking site which violates Indian laws. And it is in the the right of the government to block or censor anything which it feels hurts the sentiments of the people of this country and which is detrimental to the general functioning of the society. So I think X might have taken, but X would have to adhere to Indian laws the way our companies have to adhere to US laws or any other country's laws in their country. Right? We are free to actually come up with our own laws, and any company operating on our soil has to follow that.
Is the government itself adhering to Indian law? That is the question, Manish. Is the government itself adhering to the Indian law or by the Supreme Court's guidelines? Because X in his petition has cited the 2015 Shreya Singhal case, which was a very landmark judgment in which Section 66A, which was seen as the UPA's version of a draconian implement in the IT Act, which was being struck down, and there were very clear protocols being come out. At the end of the day, the government also has a responsibility to ensure that it is not misusing its powers as by setting down the law of the land to essentially censor any content that is unfavorable to them.
Ritangshu, I would say that technology is moving so fast that the laws also have to catch up. So what happened 5, 7, 8 years back in technology sphere is something which we cannot really take it as a benchmark. Every day tech is moving, and this is a very, very tough area to really govern because things are changing so fast. But I think I would disagree with you on that count that government is taking down things which it is not suitable. It's not the case, right? If you look at historically, Indian government has taken steps where it feels that the sensibility of the people of this country or our let's take up our foreign policy or our defense, anything which it feels is in danger, then only the government. We have long history of books being banned for sensitive reasons, right? So banning is not always incorrect. I think that context has to be taken into picture. And if one feels, one can always challenge these things, and that's what X has done. I think then we have to now, because it's in court,
and that's what has happened.
Leave it to the honorable courts to really decide whether the government of India has taken the right steps.
Speaking of the court, we have thankfully Khushbu Jain on the panel, who's an advocate of the Supreme Court. So there are essentially two stakeholders in this entire dispute. There's X/Grok and their responsibilities and their rights, for which I'll come to Rahul Bajaj shortly. But Khushbu Jain, let's talk about the government. Do you agree with this view that ultimately it's the government which is the natural and the best arbitrator of what is in national interest, what is to ensure that there is no risk of communal inflammation or law and order being threatened? Given the fact that from 2014 to 2018, there were 1,247 cases where the government stepped in and requested Twitter to reveal that. These are cases of tweets under siege. 1,247 cases from 2014 to 2018. From 2019 to 2022, that figure went up to 7,745, which is an increase of 521%. Just this year, in January, when the New Delhi railway station stampede happened during the Kumbh Mela, there was a directive which came out to remove 285 tweets or 285 contents which had to be removed of X. Is this indicative of the government carrying out its responsibility as an arbitrator of what content is on social media, or is the government just playing net nanny?
See, let's break it up. Let's understand whose responsibility. Ideally, it should have been a responsibility of the platforms, being given the immunity, being given so much of a power. They should have acted responsibly, but they never acted responsibly. They always acted in the business interest of themselves, and we have seen that, and there are enough and more of precedents which are there with us when it comes to these platforms, utilizing these platforms for their business interest, amplifying news wherever they have their business interest, taking down content or removing the, account itself when it comes to their favor, or for that matter even going for absolute misinformation campaign or a disinformation campaign, whichever they want to do it. So I think when it comes to their business interest is what they think of. When it comes to interest of a citizen, it's the government that has to step in. Ideally, it should have been done by the platform. When they fail to do so, that's where a government has to step in, because the government is duty bound to take care of its citizen and make sure that all the laws which are there in existence are being implemented. There is a law and there is an absolute law and order situation in the country, and also when it comes to national security, when it comes to all other aspects, when it comes to sovereignty of the nation, it is duties entrusted with the government. Now, when you talk about the numbers which you were narrating, that from 2014 to 19 to this, how numbers have increased, you also have to see how number of users have increased in these platforms. From then, you can't just put a number in a silos, you have to see it. I absolutely do not agree, but in a way I would say that yes, there has to be an accountability on both the sides. You cannot leave government or anybody for that matter without any accountability and transparency. And I think that's where the portal like Sahyog, which has been created, is somewhere one portal where seamlessly all the requests can go to the from the nodal agency or notified agencies of India or law enforcement agencies who are being tasked to do so, from one platform seamlessly to from that, using that Sahyog to all these platforms, so that the content can be taken down. Because when you talk about content like this,
the problem is Sahyog itself.
When you talk about content like this, timely action is very important.
I'm just pointing a viewer's attention, Khushbu, that Sahyog portal itself has been criticized by X in its petition. It's been called a censorship portal, which is allowing the Content Regulatory Center, I4C I think it's called, to issue arbitrary takedown requests.
If there is an arbitrary, then you go ahead and talk about what do you call arbitrary. Practically, when you want to take actions, you want to amplify the news, you want to put in contents, you want to bring in users who are practically considered as anti-national from India, you're absolutely fine in doing so. So when you're coming in Indian jurisdiction and do not want to abide by Indian laws or rules and regulations, then why not go somewhere else? China, you're not going, because China has banned you to do all those things. And China has stupid things. I'm not taking an example of China that India should be like China, but I feel India has a duty, or a government has a duty, and we as Indians have a right against our own laws which are there, that those laws can be implemented, our rights have been safeguarded, and those rights cannot be the rights below the rights of these platforms who do it for their business needs. I'm not saying everything has to have the due process. There has to be a proper procedure that should be followed with transparency and accountability.
And which is why we are having these questions here. We of course understand that the government has its regulation of policing whatever content goes on X. And that brings me to my next question. Rahul Bajaj, I think everyone who has used Twitter or X and has gone through the transition from the previous regime to the new regime will understand that Twitter in many ways has become the wild west of social media. There are problems over authenticity of profiles, with the entire very Tughlaqi fiasco over blue tick to now golden tick. There have been problems in terms of racism and anti-Semitism and is hateful content being openly spread by handles. There are problems about pornography. Elon Musk's entire business handle has been to make it unfiltered, unregulated, make it a bit more no holds barred. And that has reflected on X being seen as a lot more wild and unregulated platform. And the best exemplification of this has been in the form of Grok. Grok was meant to, and hailed as something which is a lot more unfiltered, a lot more flamboyant compared to ChatGPT or DeepSeek. But what we've seen with Grok in the last few days is it can easily be manipulated to be a people pleaser, come up with hateful content, come up with abusive content, and even downright politically incorrect comment. Does this not indicate that there are basic platforms, there are basic problems when it comes to whether it be Grok or X, which Elon Musk needs to put into place before trying to lecture the government on free speech?
So, Ritangshu, I think these are two different things that have come together. One is, of course, the kind of content which is allowed on X, and I do agree with the other panelists that for different countries, freedom of speech could mean different things, and there is a socio-cultural background to each and every country, and any social media platform has to respect that. It has to be within those particular frameworks. It could be laws. It is also the social structure that it has to follow. Because whatever is correct as free speech in the Western world may not be the right definition of free speech in the context of, let's say, India or any other country for that matter. What we are talking about for Grok, Grok is a is an LLM, right? It's a kind of a chat GPT for easier way of understanding, and it is trained on humongous amount of conversational data, humongous amount of information that is available publicly available on internet or even on from other sources. And just so that it could become much more conversational, it could reflect the sentiment, or it could also reflect the way a particular person is engaging with it in a conversation. It has been tuned in that particular way so that it reflects that. And of course, when someone probably used some kind of slander and slang, it responded back in a similar way, because the way the solution works is nothing, but it tries to find out what is the best, closest words that it can find in its memory. It is just like as if when we look at the kids, and if we hear some kids using the
Exactly.
swear, we understand and we say that probably that they would have heard it from someone in the family, right? So
And that's my point,
it has
Rahul.
learned that.
Rahul, that's my point. I'm very glad. I don't want to interrupt you, but I'm glad you used a metaphor which people understand. Grok behaves like a child. It therefore abuses because it wants to look cool, it wants to be a people pleaser, and it wants to come across as something which is unregulated. So Elon Musk essentially has created chatbot which has shown problematic tendencies of being like a child. And in many ways those problems of lack of content control are also reflected on X, although it's a different ball game and a much more complicated ball game. The larger point I've shown is that perhaps Elon Musk and the current management of X/Grok, he's showing that it is not really capable of self-regulation, which is why the Indian government probably has to step in.
Yes, so regulation, again, as I said, regulation could mean different things for different geographies. So for a lot of things in India, yes, the government would have to come in, would have to put certain regulations, and for solutions like Grok responding in a particular way, there have to be guardrails. And I'm very sure that this is something where the guardrails were missing. Those guardrails will definitely come in, because if you recall a few years back when Siri came in, Siri also responded in a particular way, though Apple is very responsible as an organization that we understand. But Siri also responded to someone, which would eventually mean that how a person should take one's life. Because all these particular solutions do need guardrails, and at certain point in time, those guardrails fail. I'm very sure that this is one of those particular cases, and especially in case of Grok, and I'm not talking about X, and I'm not combining these two things, but especially in the case of Grok, these particular guardrails will definitely come in time, and we will see that.
Well, I understand your point of view. There is a very famous case of 2016 where Microsoft introduced a chatbot on Twitter, which was called Tay. And the argument was that this is an AI with zero chill. It was supposed to represent a 19-year-old American girl. The problem is it started parroting statements fed to it, and within 24 hours, that chatbot had to be removed because it was doing hateful content, content of self-harm and all this. So this is a developing field. So Rahul, you're confident that even if guardrails will come on Grok, and those perhaps you're saying that it needs to be de-hyphenated. But let's focus on guardrails. Pavan Duggal, coming back to you. This old Latin adage of who will guard the guards. Whose responsibility should it be to ensure that these guardrails are in place? If it's the platform in this question in X, is it not the government's responsibility to then police whether these guardrails are placed or not? And if so, can we then trust any government for that matter to ensure that it just protects these guardrails and does not impinge into the area of censorship? Because if you look at pretext, if past precedents, we just have 3 of them in the last few years. In 2021, when it comes to the farmer protest, there were several posts which were brought down. In 2023, when the Prime Minister's documentary aired on BBC, there were several posts which were brought down. In 2025, this year itself, when the stampede happened in the New Delhi station during Kumbh Mela, at a time when there was initially a lot of resistance to put out the real story, the directive came soon after from the IT ministry to take some content down. Can we then trust any government to not just monitor the social media sphere, but also ensure that it doesn't stray into the domain of censorship and become a net nanny?
The beauty is that right now it's a wild, wild west. Most of the countries don't have any dedicated laws on AI. The only 2 exceptions are the European Union in the form of the EU AI Act and China's new rules on generative AI. Barring that, the guardrails have never been set. In fact, everybody's talking about guardrails, but what is the common consensus on which guardrails need to be put in where is a fundamental question that nobody is answering. Also, we need to be understanding that the responsibility of putting in guardrails is at multiple levels. First, it's a level of the coder. The coder has to make sure that he puts or she puts in appropriate ethical guardrails, legal guardrails, so that the chatbot or the AI algorithm does not go rogue. Number 2, it's also the responsibility of the company that's providing the platform where the said AI algorithm is being provided, because they can't say, I have only provided you the platform and I can't be held responsible. They have to be equally responsible for guardrails. But ultimately, the industry is shouting, saying, sir, where are the guardrails? There is no law anywhere in the world which is stipulating guardrails, barring the Chinese law on generative AI. In the context of India, there is no specific guidance by the government on what the guardrails need to be. We do not have a dedicated law on artificial intelligence so far in the country. We also find that the IT Act is thoroughly inadequate when one looks at trying to regulate AI through guardrails, and so are the IT rules 2021 being completely silent on this scenario. The 2 advisories of the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology of 1st March 2024 and 15th March 2024 are at best only advisories requesting the AI companies to ensure that their platforms and their algorithms do not violate the provisions of the law. There is no penal consequences. So forget about guardrails. No private sector is ever going to put any guardrail till such time it's going to impact the economic interests. Coming to the second part of the question, yes, I think every sovereign government would want to have some control on AI for a variety of purposes. Number 1, for controlling the narrative. Number 2, because it could potentially prejudicially impact the sovereignty, security, or integrity of a country. Or number 3, it could even be prejudicially impacting the national interest or the national perspectives of a particular country. But then, does that mean that the government can actually go ahead and mandate its dictate on AI providers. That may not necessarily happen till such time there's an effective law which provides the government the facility to do so. So therefore, the need for countries to transmigrate from the current stage where they are only coming up with national policies on AI to a stage where they come up with specific dedicated laws on AI could be a good starting point. Till such time that doesn't happen, it's a gray zone. Both the sides could argue on either side of the fence, saying that the other party is going beyond the control or is potentially trying to misuse. But I think we have to realize that artificial intelligence law jurisprudence is only beginning to evolve. And because we are all riding a running tiger, which is never stopping, we'll have to calibrate our approaches on the running tiger as and when we go forward. So hopefully there is new rules, new specific guidelines on these guardrails, and they need to be mandated by the mandate of law with penal consequences so that such mandates for establishing and maintaining guardrails can be effectively implemented by the private sector before they start making their AI platforms and algorithms available for use in the public.
Okay. Okay, so I think we have now established the fact that yes, there needs to be, while yes, we, for the sake of brevity, have... Okay, Manish wants to come in. Manish, to make your point.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that with Elon Musk, one would have to take a lot of things with a bit of pinch of salt, because he is a very unique personality in the sense that he is a businessman and he's also a politician now, or very close to that. And like Trump, he's he has a past.
He's also a very powerful businessman, a powerful politician, Manish.
So it's one and the same. He has a past history of using platforms to negotiate. So you can see that in Brazil he had a confrontation with the president. You never know what Elon Musk is doing with X and Grok here, and sometimes I feel that he might have left it unregulated just to get some kind of advertisement out there, and then he might put guardrail. And with even X, because there's a lot of geopolitics going on, so his platforms, what he is doing, I think India would have to be very careful, and this government would have to be very careful and how to respond to him. So there are a lot of things which I feel is at play when it comes to Elon Musk and his companies. So I think one would have to really keep that in perspective. But otherwise, all the social media platforms, they are pretty happy complying with whatever is happening. And another aspect is that whatever government it is, I think we should have first trust in our government. If we do not trust our government, who's going to do that? And if government does anything else, we have a pretty robust judiciary that it has to go, come back on that. So therefore, I think the first thing is that we will have to trust the government.
I don't think any rational citizen trusts Elon Musk over the Prime Minister or our government at this point, because you're right, Elon Musk is a maverick. And the fact that these visuals that we are showing on our screens is just a month old, and that we have come up with this, we've seen this quite unprecedented legal challenge being put out, indicates that Elon Musk is evidently using pressure tactics to get the government to follow his business deals, and has a history of doing so. Having said that, doesn't mean that the questions raised by X, especially about misuse of the Sahyadri cell, about misuse of Section 79(3)(b) of the IT Act, are not invalid. At the end of the day, is the Supreme Court's order of 2015 being followed? And as Pavan Duggal pointed out, does the problems that we are facing over regulation of X only indicates that we have a much more complicated problem ahead when it comes to even thinking of a framework to regulate AI? And that's the lesson we have learned from Grok today as well. But nevertheless, thank you so much, Rahul Bajaj, Manish Barriarr, Pavan Duggal, and Khushbu Jain, of course, stays on with us for a equally fascinating debate that has been raging across social media. That is about the alimony and the issue of alimony debate as well. But for now, thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me on this show. We are back in 2 minutes. Stay tuned.